familiar. So if you don't know by now, then you should probably get familiar.
Yo guys, what's up? It's Delinkquent here, showcasing my FLC 17 winners deck. And what shall I say? It's a deck you don't see every day. Usually I'm absolutely infamously known for playing shitty combo decks like Empty Jar or other disgusting stuff like Burn, which is great, but this time I decided to follow another route, and I was basically looking at the current meta game, and I felt like aggro decks and so-called Chaos Turbo decks, which are absolutely not turbo decks in my opinion, but that's another topic, like more Thunder Dragon Chaos decks were so widespread that I thought, okay, eventually I could find a deck that beats both of them very reliable. And since in general I was used to play rather defensive decks, I decided to go for the exact opposite this time, and this brought me to where I am right now. So I'm just gonna start with showing you my deck, as you can already see on the screen, but I want to highlight obviously some cards because I'm pretty sure there are a lot of card choices you don't see every day. So let's start with the monsters. You are having here 3 times Berserk Gorilla, which is definitely an awesome card. I mean, it's a fire spitting ape, a little bit Dragon Ball style, 2000 attack, level 4 monster. What else do you need? Very great beat stick. I definitely prefer it over, let's say, Skilled Dark Magician, which is like a more widespread beat stick in general, because it's a 2000 attack. That's absolutely just the biggest caveman argument. You can say 2000 is bigger than 1900. Like along all level 4 monsters, Berserk Gorilla I'd say is definitely like the biggest gorilla out there, so easy choice to rely on 3 copies. Then you have the Giant Red, also very nasty little boy. Very versatile in this deck actually. In general, your main pick may be Pyramid Turtle, but I definitely won a lot of games searching for Injection Fairy Lily, which is definitely one of my favorite cards in this deck as well, with Giant Red. And in some cases of emergency you can even go for Exile Force. So I'd say overall Giant Red in this deck is more of a toolbox card. And then you have 3 times Kaiku the Ghost Destroyer. Like, this card doesn't really need any introduction. Like when you're facing a lot of Chaos decks, it's absolutely no-brainer to rely on 3 copies of it. Plus it's an 1800 beat stick, so also definitely goes very straightforward. Then you got Pyramid Turtle, a fan favorite, and also, in my humble opinion, the best recruiter out there currently. Most likely there are more versatile recruiters like Mystic Tomato that allow you to summon way more monsters, but the biggest advantage of Pyramid Turtle is obviously that you're not only limited to small monsters, but you can summon big boys, as for instance Ryokoki or even OG Vampire Lord. So you can very easily get out very strong monsters. So Ryokoki in general is absolutely like the strongest card, just judging on the attack points, like not including this little cute fairy when you put her on steroids by paying 2000 life points, but just by the basic value, obviously, like Ryokoki is the MVP. And the good thing about Ryokoki is that you have the ability to take out almost every monster that's currently circulating. So obviously like all the level 4 monsters, but also even like a monster like BLS or Demorg if you face them. You could take them out with Ryokoki's effect. which rarely occurs, but I think it's very great to have this resource. Like, I think one of the best things that actually can happen is when you have an opponent that feels like the biggest pro on planet motherfucking Earth when summoning BLS in defense mode. And you're like, okay, cool story, bro, so I'm just gonna attack it with Ryukaki. Feels very, very good. Feels like a Ninja Grandmaster Sasuke on steroids, so absolutely great. And then you have Breaker, great beater, gets rid of back row, nothing really to say more. Exiled Force, very versatile monster removal. Costs the monster summon though, a normal summon though, so at first I wasn't 100% sure if I should play it or not, but very glad I did, because it definitely won me some games. Injection Fairy Lily, absolutely MVP, super, super, super good. Arguably my favorite monster of the deck, as mentioned previously. Comes very silently, but lethally at the same time, so great card. Then, lost connection, that happens, I guess. But it's all part of the show, ladies and gentlemen, don't get distracted by this. So, here we go. Injection Fairy Lily, great card. Doesn't really need any further explanation. Tribe Infecting Viruses. I was at first hesitating to play Tribe, but the ability to discard cards from your hand is in this deck very, very, very important. That's also why I play Tribute to the Doomed. So you play 4 tribute monsters like Cocky and Vampire Lord, and you can't always expect to just special summon them out of your deck like a boss with Pyramid Turtle or whatever. That's not very realistic that this happens all the time. So you definitely need an opportunity to eventually discard them when you have them in your hand, because you really want to revive them from grave with Book of Life, for instance. So that's where Tribe Infecting Virus comes into play. Let's say you accumulate like a Cocky and the Vampire Lord, or even 2 Cockies in your hand, then you're very, very, very glad to get rid of them by discarding them for Tribe Infecting Virus. Not to mention, obviously, like the ability of Tribe Infecting Virus itself to clear the board and swing for some big damage. The last monster card I was relying on is Vampire Lord. Not too sure about playing him. I think it gives you a little bit more variety over, okay, I'm just gonna, in 100% of all cases, some Cocky thing. Still not super convinced of it after all, but it's a logical addition to the other cards. Since you can summon it with Turtle, it has 2000 attack, and the effect might actually come very handy when you're facing a lot of Sakuretsu armors, because let's be honest, you don't always have a face-up Royal Decree. That's not very realistic. There are tons of situations where your opponent has 2-3 back row cards, and with a Vampire Lord you don't really have anything to be afraid of. So I'd say it's definitely a viable choice as well. Coming to the spells, the first spell that's absolutely a highlight of this deck is obviously Book of Life. And Book of Life definitely has a lot of positive synergy with other cards, like the absolutely OG card Tribute to the Doomed. Like, come on guys, you see a mummy mummificating, if that's a word in English, I don't know, and to be honest, I don't really care too much. Mummifying another mummy, that's awesome. I was thinking, okay, I always like Egypt themes, like you have this Pyramid Turtle, we were already having like a zombie thing, so what might be a silly card to play? And then I came along, Tribute to the Doomed, and at first I had an idea of playing Back to Square One, because I think the troll factor of Back to Square One is bigger. But the problem with Back to Square One is that it does something that's in general a good thing, and that's like not filling your opponent's graveyard with monsters. However, in this case, since you need your Book of Lives always live, pun intended, you'll definitely try to fill your opponent's graveyard with monsters. And that's the difference between Tribute to the Doomed and Back to Square One. So you can just put in monsters in your opponent's graveyard, and even, let's say, even if you hit a Sinister Serpent with it, it's not the end of the world, because you then can directly remove it from play with Book of Life or even Kaiku. You play 3 times Kaiku and 3 times Book of Life, so you definitely have a lot of graveyard manipulation going on, so I'm absolutely not worried. You still might say, okay, Tribute to the Doomed is very expensive. It's a 2-for-1, which is a very, very disadvantageous thing to start with. But that's only if you don't really look at the deck the way I did. So in general, when you having like discussions about GOAT format, a lot of people say, okay, it's about card advantage, and the player that has like +5 definitely wins the match. And the funny thing about this deck is that it absolutely doesn't care about card advantage. Sure, when you're totally running out of resources, you might lose the game. Absolutely true. But on the other hand, like, okay, I'm gonna make a -1 by blowing away a face-down monster, but then I'm gonna swing for 4000 damage, and if I do this 2 times, you're dead. So, who cares? It's, for me personally, absolutely irrelevant. Fun fact, that's also why I don't play Delinkquent Duo, even though my name is Delinkquent. So you might say, hey, I should play it, and yeah, eventually I should play it, but not in this deck. So you definitely don't play the numbers game. I was definitely in situations where Tribute to the Doomed felt very expensive, or where I would have loved to keep a hand card, but there were also other situations where I dumped the Ryokoki and then revived it with Book of Life and attacked for game. So overall, I absolutely don't regret the choice, and come on guys, playing a deck successful with Tribute to the Doomed, that's definitely something you have to do. It's awesome. It's absolutely awesome. Creature swap, self-explanatory with all the pyramid turtles and giant rats. Doesn't really need any further explanation. Nobleman of Crossout. A little bit risky nowadays to play 2, because there are a lot of warriors where you absolutely have this card doing nothing at all. But I was expecting a lot of Chaos variants as well, and against Chaos this card is absolutely nuts, so I decided to take the risk of playing 2, which is what most people currently do. And I think a lot of people aren't aware that playing 2 Noblemen of Crossout is a risk. Since you have, like I said, against Warrior a dead card, also against like rather rarer decks, like let's say Reasoning Gate Turbo, aka the real Turbo, aka the only deck that should be called Turbo in my arrogant opinion. And you should always calculate this. However, this deck is a caveman deck, and the real caveman deck is 2 Noblemen of Crossout. Despite from that, I have Graceful Charity, Heavy Storm, Mystical Space Typhoon, Pot of Greed, Premature Burial, Snatch Steal. None of those cards really need any introduction or any further mentioning. The only thing I would like to highlight is playing Mystical Space Typhoon in a deck that already has 3 Royal Decrees. At first I was thinking about cutting MST, but then I realized that you don't always start with Royal Decree. Like I said earlier with Vampire Lord, you can't say, okay, I got Decree anyway, so I can attack however I want to. That's not very realistic, so I was very glad to have MST to get rid of some back row, and of course there's also still the possibility that your opponent has scapegoats on Book of Moon that you would really like to get rid of in the end phase, especially scapegoats, obviously. The biggest clue of the deck, I'd say, is running 3 Royal Decree. It's such a good meta call right now. Even Thunder Dragon Chaos decks were starting to rely on heavier trap lineups, like playing Solemn Judgments, Sakuretsu Armor, some even playing Trap Does Shoot. That it's, for me, definitely a very good time to play 3 Royal Decree. I was having thoughts about playing these cards for like at least 1 or even eventually even 2 years. I always was a little bit hesitant because in general, as I mentioned previously, I was rather going for disgusting combo decks, and Decree was a very good side deck card, but definitely not a good main deck. However, at this tournament, it just felt absolutely like neck breaking for my opponent every time I hit Decree and he had like a bunch of trap cards, and this absolutely happened a lot of times. A very important thing about Royal Decree in this deck is to not get greedy. So a lot of people were probably in general going for card advantage with Royal Decree, aka waiting until they can chain it to a trap card for an easy +1. I did this too in some situations, but if my opponent had like 2 or even 3 back row cards, for me it was absolutely a crystal clear move to just activate it ASAP, mostly like directly in the end phase after my opponent set all his trap cards. Because this way you don't risk it to get it solemn or eventually even Dust Tornado. Because I think that would have been absolutely horrible. If you have Decree open for 2 or 3 turns in the current format, it's very likely that you will win the game very easily. Because you play so many strong monsters that your opponent just can't really compete, and even if he has another stronger monster, you always have Tribute to the Doomed, Creature Swap, Snatch Steal, Exiled Force, Tribe Infected Virus, so almost always a way to get rid of them. So always remember, if you want to go for this deck or eventually trying to build a similar deck, don't play the numbers game. Don't look for an pseudo easy +1, just activate Decree and attack the opponent. You don't mind if he has like a +5. What's a +5 when his life is dropped to 0? It's worth nothing. Last card I wanted to highlight is Call of the Haunted. It's a more or less unusual choice in a deck that plays 3 Royal Decree. At first I was hesitating playing any other trap card, then I had, I think, Ring of Destruction in the deck, and Ring of Destruction definitely would be a trap card you might consider as well. I didn't want to play another trap card because of the bad synergy with Decree, so I decided to only go for one, and that was Call of the Haunted, since, like I mentioned before, I have Tribute to the Doomed, and eventually even Graceful Charity and Tribe Infecting Virus to dump some zombies in the grave, not to mention other situations where eventually you don't have Decree and run into Torrential Mirror Force or whatever, and having Call of the Haunted always put a lot of pressure on the board because it gave you another summon in a very slow format in general, and that's just awesome. Also, I want to highlight that a lot of people might say, okay, Call of the Haunted and Royal Decree have a very negative synergy, and this is true if Decree is the first card to be face up. If it's the other way around, they even might have a very good synergy. Like, let's say you have a Call of the Haunted face up, you could do, I don't know, Berserk Gorilla or Ryokoki, and then your opponent tries to MST or Breaker or even Heavy Storm your call away, then you can eventually change the situation by flipping Decree up and then saving a monster. So I think this is a synergy a lot of people don't have, don't keep in mind, but that comes in very handy sometimes. That's it for the main deck. Very aggressive deck. I'd say arguably the most aggressive deck you've seen in a long time, when you just considering normal decks that are not like turbo decks that might obviously like flood the field with 5 monsters with Dimension Fusion or other stuff. But like compared to Anti-Meta Warriors or Chaos Warriors, for instance, I think it's definitely way more aggressive. Coming to the side deck, knowing how nasty some combo decks might be, I decided to go for 3 spell cancelers. Awesome card, shuts down a lot of combo decks entirely. A lot of people prefer playing 3 copies of Cyberstein. Yeah, it's really called Cyberstein, I think, because Japanese like weird German names like Stein, which is German for stone, / a reference to Frankenstein. Yeah, so I'm pretty sure it's Stein, but you can also say Cyberstein, I guess. Whatever, we're drifting apart. So in general, guys, I would recommend you to play Spell Canceller if you really want to screw up combo decks. Sure, it takes a turn and / takes a setup, you need a monster, but I'd say it's a common misconception, for instance, to play against Reasoning Gate and say, okay, I summon Cyberstein, pay 5,000 life points, summon less warrior, and then I won. No, that's definitely not how it works a lot of times, because your opponent might have an out to this strategy as well. So Spell Canceller, I think, does the better job, plus it has a super sick synergy with Royal Decree. Like, let's say, even if you're playing against burn decks and you have Royal Decree in main, then a lot of people say, okay, I got Decree, I have an auto win against burn. Yeah, but eventually the burn player is smart enough to adapt in game 2 and 3 and side in, like, let's say, Messenger of Peace. Not to mention the probably main deck, Level Limit, Area B, and Swords of Revealing Light. So if you really want to shut down a lot of nasty decks entirely, go for Spell Canceller. Then you have 2 kinetic soldiers. Like, I don't think Cypher Soldier is accurate. If you're absolutely historical correct nerd like I am, you don't say Cypher Soldier, by the way. That's another absolutely unimportant side note. So Kinetic Soldier is great. It's searchable by Giant Red, and it's another very friendly declaration of war to warrior decks, obviously. I don't think I would have needed even 2 copies, but I thought, okay, so many warrior decks around. Sounds like a good thing to play. 2 copies of Book of Moon. For probably the worst matchup, and that's like Goat Control or Chaos Control that includes Metamorphosis. Because, let's be honest, 1000 Dice Restrict is definitely one of the biggest weaknesses of this deck. If there would be a meta field full of decks that include 1000 Dice Restrict, I would highly recommend to not play this deck, because it sucks against it. Fortunately, I only had to play one opponent, Cameron. Shoutouts to Cameron. It was a very close duel. I was very happy to win it. It was a 2-1. Most matches I won 2-0, but this was a 2-1. And could have easily also went out in his favor. So glad I had Book of Moon along with the Skill Drain to eventually take an abbreviation here directly to Skill Drain. Skill Drain serves the same purpose, basically stopping 1000 Dice Restrict, as well as other nasty things, like definitely interferes with a lot of combo decks, even though most of them play Giant Trunade or Storm anyway, so it doesn't really help you as much as you can think, but still a card that shuts down a lot of decks. But as I said, mainly 1000 Dice Restrict and Tsukuyomi, which is also a threat to this deck, but also glad I didn't face really too many Tsukuyomis as well. So I overjumped, if that's a word, Nobleman of Extermination. I never really liked this card. It always felt like super bad against a lot of decks that play chainable traps. But I really think it's a great addition to Royal Decree. when you have people that side in a lot of trap cards or that play a lot of trap cards in the main deck. Just like I said, same thing as mentioned before, you can't always have Royal Decree. So I would recommend to play 2 in the side deck. Removing Solemn Judgment is awesome. Also, I think Chaos Return is on the rise. Definitely a good idea to eventually go for a Lucky Punch and banish Return of the different dimension. Because let's say you hit Return and remove all copies of the deck of your opponent, then you can easily from that point on be absolutely reckless with Kaiku and Book of Life and just banish everything in their opponent's graveyard, and there's not really anything you can do then afterwards. Last card in my side deck is Trap Dust Shoot. I actually just sided it a single time, and there was in Grand Finals against Dinosig. I sided it in game 3 when going first and was fortunate enough to start with it. And this definitely won me the game. Especially the knowledge, which card he had in hand, so I could then really mind gaming him and then summoning a Mobius that was for him absolutely not very optimal, but probably it was for him the way to go. He probably would have done the same, so I would not consider this to be a mistake that he made in finals, but it really allowed me to win the game. And yeah, my initial thoughts on Trap Dust Shoot was more to take it against combo decks. Like if you start against, let's say, Library, FTK, MTGR, even like Reasoning Gate Turbo, it's awesome to start off with Trap Dust Shoot because they need their resources. If you can just steal away at least one monster, eventually a key card, then this really slows the other deck down, and then you can definitely punish it very severely. So that being said, this is my main deck. Like Fusion deck obviously doesn't really matter here, it's just for mind gaming. Could have been fun to not have a Fusion deck at all, but I say, okay, come on, let's give the other person at least the impression I'm this one time playing a normal deck, but I guess I have to disappoint you because this deck is absolutely not normal. A lot of people, I don't think, like really understood what the deck is all about. And I can only repeat myself, you don't play the numbers game, you play absolutely caveman Yu-Gi-Oh! You play a monster that's stronger than the average opponent monster and attack. And win the game by clogging your opponent like in a manner that not a lot of other decks can really do. So that's it for now, but before I end the video, I would like to thank first of all Jinzo&Tonic for having me, and also of course give some shoutouts. So it's a long list, so I hope I don't forget anybody, but obviously like shoutouts to Farmwork Library, to all the staff doing excellent job in hosting tournaments, as well as shoutouts to goatformat.com for also on the regular basis hosting absolutely enjoyable tournaments, very professional. Of course, also very important, shoutouts to the guys from Goat Community Italia. Very cool guys, putting Europe on the map, Goat wise. Always very friendly, like giving me some shoutouts, so I'm not only feeling like almost obligated to give them a shout out back, but I can like really say that those guys are absolutely great. Also check out their videos, very good quality content, you shouldn't miss out on that. And yeah, despite from that, I also would like to give a shout out to 3 persons. First one is my brother, Alefia 2. He couldn't attend the tournament unfortunately, but I always enjoy the tournaments the most that we could play together. You should also be aware of his decks. He has a tendency to also play very silly but creative decks. I really like this. Then shoutouts to my French homeboy, French Alpha. I cheated on you, man. I'm very sorry for this. I told you I'm gonna write you the next time I would feel ready to play Yu-Gi-Oh! And then I just signed up for this tournament without telling you. I'm feeling very shitty, but at least I can give you props right now. You're definitely a very decent Chaos player, and I'm pretty sure, like with Chaos decks, I will always in the mirror match I wouldn't have any chance against you. But I think I'm definitely having a chance when playing my shitty decks. So let's have a duel soon. Hopefully you watch this video. And yeah, last but not least, shout out to my beloved girlfriend, which always supports me and is my muse, my source of creativity, and absolutely supports me like in the cutest and best way possible to enjoy this absolutely beautiful hobby. I think it's a gift that's probably the best thing you can ask for. Alright guys, so thanks for watching this video. Hopefully you could stand the whole 30 minutes. And it's Delinkquent signing out. Bye bye.